All right, today's video is an introduction to the concept of evolution, more specifically natural selection, which is a big part of evolutionary theory. To help me today, I have with me my good friend, Dr. Ken.
Hi guys.
Who is studying to be an emergency room doctor right now. I shouldn't say studying to be, you are extremely close to it, but yeah. Anyway, so evolution, as I've kind of alluded to, evolution is a big concept. We're going to take several videos to go over this. But your baseline definition for evolution is the idea that all life on Earth descended from a previous type of life on Earth. Nothing just shows up out of the blue. Okay? So let's take a trip back to the 18th century.
Is that when life originated?
It is not when life originated, but what I just wanted to show you was what scientific perspective was in 1800, because some of the scientists we're going to talk about came along then. Now, it was just becoming accepted at that point that Earth was billions of years old. Before, we thought it was like, a few thousand years old. But we were starting to discover things like fossils and, actually look at rock layers and things like that. Many scientists out there still thought that species on the planet were permanent and had never gone extinct, or there weren't any organisms previously that had ever gone extinct, which we now know to be completely untrue. For example, they didn't know what dinosaurs were back then.
Because Jurassic Park hadn't come out.
Yeah, exactly. And also, they all didn't have, dinosaur toys when they were growing up. So we can't blame them. But anyway, now there were a few scientists out there that were kind of starting to see some pieces of evidence out there that suggested that maybe life on Earth hadn't always been the way it was then. So I guess the first guy I'll talk about is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Now, he was a French scientist. He might have been Belgian. He has a French name, though. But anyway, he's kind of famous. He's kind of a biological punchline right now because his theory was pretty wrong. But it was actually an important thing because he was approaching the change of life on Earth, or evolution, in a way that hadn't been thought of before. What he said was the environment drives that change on Earth, which is actually right. Now, the way he explained it was totally wrong. He basically said that an individual adapts to its environment by acquiring traits during its lifetime, and then it's able to pass those down later. So there's always the famous giraffe relation to this idea. I don't remember him even specifically talking about giraffes. I didn't study Lamarck in detail.
Hadn't been discovered yet.
Yeah, but I think they discovered giraffes. But he would essentially say that a giraffe, or to explain why a giraffe had a long neck, he would say there was an ancestor that had a normal-sized neck and somehow stretched that neck out over its lifetime because it tried really hard to get to leaves that were high up in the tree. And that was very useful for it.
So if I believe in myself, I can't make my neck longer?
Yep. According to Lamarck, you can. But anyway, and then not only that, but this trait that it acquired over its lifetime, it could pass down. Now, we kind of look at this now and we think this is ridiculous, right?
Like working out and then having a super ripped baby.
Right, yeah. So, if I sat there and did a bunch of bicep curls, then I had a baby, my baby's not going to come out with biceps that big, right? It's going to be a normal baby. But Lamarck might suggest otherwise based on this idea.
Oh, what if he tried that?
I wonder if he did. But anyway, so this next guy you might have heard of before, Charles Darwin, one of the most famous biologists of all time. Now, he came around just after Lamarck, and he was very curious about this idea of evolution. He wasn't. Some people think that Darwin invented evolution. He didn't. The idea of evolution was out there. Just no one could really explain it. Everyone was looking for evidence and a way to approach this idea. And Darwin kind of made the first big steps. And he was a naturalist by trade. He studied plants, he studied animals, all that sort of thing. And he went on a 2-year expedition on a ship called the HMS Beagle.
During which time his mutton chops evolved into a sweet beard.
Yes, they did. And I'm sure they did. And but they went all the way down across the Atlantic Ocean. I'm probably doing this in reverse to the camera, but around South America. They stopped in a place called the Galapagos Islands, which he made very famous. And I believe they actually continued to go back around Africa and everything, and then back to England. So he's gone for 2 years, and he did a lot of observations in that time that led to some really interesting thoughts. He used, and here's a good picture of some of the beaks that he noticed in the Galapagos finches. And he published this book, and he actually didn't publish it immediately when he got back or anything. He actually sat on the idea for a while because he wanted to build more evidence, but he was actually a little afraid of publishing the book at the time.
Because it was a controversial idea.
Yeah, it was a controversial idea.
Unlike now.
Yeah. Do you do you know what caused him to actually publish the book?
Somebody else was trying to publish before him.
Right. Yeah. The Dark Side of Science. He was kind of afraid to publish it until he found out some other guy, scientific rival out there, had a similar idea and was publishing a similar book. And then he went, I got to beat him to it, and published On the Origin of Species.
That's how we got to the moon.
Yeah. Yeah. Like space race. Yeah. A lot of science gets done that way. But anyway, so, and in this, it's a thick book, and he lays out all of his ideas on natural selection. Now, he referred to evolution itself as being descent with modification. And the way that it occurs is through a process called natural selection. So let's focus on that idea of descent with modification first. What does descent mean?
Coming from something.
Yeah, coming from something. And he said that, and Lamarck was kind of saying the similar thing, that just the means is different, but that, you know, living things come from other living things, but they can change over time. And what Darwin was saying was, let's say a parent has some sort of mutation that's in their genes, and as we know, genes can get passed down to their offspring. They might pass that mutation down to their offspring. That's what can cause different
while
species.
Lamarck would see a giraffe with a short neck and a giraffe with a long neck and think that giraffe just stretched itself out, Darwin would see a giraffe with a short neck and assume that its brother, who had the longer neck, was the one who was able to reproduce and therefore made the next generation.
Right, and he'd probably also say that it was due to a mutation and not because of something that just happened during its lifetime. So, yeah, and a specific example of this I kind of talked about is finches. He noticed, or he actually even concluded, he thought that all those 13 finches that he saw in the Galapagos, they came from a common descendant that flew from the mainland to South America and then adapted to many different areas of the island to get all those different behaviors and beak patterns.
And important in that was that they didn't mix between islands. So you had an isolated population on each island.
Yeah, and we're gonna go into specific detail on the finches in class, but yeah, that's a big one right there, is that they're in separate islands. But anyway, now natural selection, this is the process in which evolution actually happens according to Darwin. Now there are a few other things that can happen that we'll talk about, but this is the vast majority of evolution happens via natural selection, and in that process, the organisms that are most suited for their environment will survive and reproduce most successfully. If they don't reproduce, then natural selection doesn't occur. So on this picture on the left, which organism is more suited for its environment, the white moth or the black moth?
The white moth.
The white moth. Why do you think that is?
Because you can't see it as well.
Right. And so if you're a predator going around, which one would you eat probably?
Well, it wouldn't matter. Predators have heat vision.
90s movie reference. But if you're a predator without heat vision, which one would you eat?
I would eat the black moth because it's easier to see.
Right. So you're saying the white moth's more suited for the environment, it's probably going to survive, and it's going to reproduce. So the way Darwin broke this down, there are kind of 4 factors. And I'm actually, factor 1 and factor 2 sort of go together, and then it sort of goes in steps. At least that's the way I view it. But so the first factor that people kind of overlook is overproduction. There needs to be a lot of an organism in order for natural selection to occur. If you have like 3 dogs in this giant field,
it's full of dog food.
Yeah, and they're easily able to survive. You're not going to get natural selection because all those dogs will just eat to their heart's
content. And there's lots of dog
ladies. Yes. Anyway, yeah, lots of, assuming there's plenty of mates, yes. Dog ladies. I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, science.
So once you get a population, though, that makes more offspring, then can actually survive their environment, then you get what we call selective pressure. And that's really important. Now, he actually got this idea from another, he actually wasn't a scientist. He was a priest named Thomas Robert Malthus, who was a British priest. So not all organisms can actually be sustained by the environment in some situations. That's what needs to happen.
So if there were this environment where everybody had enough food and everyone could mate,
there would not be natural selection because there wouldn't be any pressure to try to gain mate or even survive that environment. Yeah. You would just survive no matter what. Another thing that needs to exist in that population is genetic variation, because and what that means is there are different genes within that population that might give some an advantage or some a disadvantage. And an adaptation, we like to refer to these as adaptations, and that's an inherited characteristic or a gene that increases that organism's ability to survive and reproduce in that environment.
But not all genetic variation is an adaptation.
Right, and there's plenty of genetic variations that don't do anything for an organism, and there's genetic variations that are not good for an organism. So adaptation really just refers to those positive ones. Not all genetic variation is positive. In fact, most genetic variation does nothing at all and makes no difference. We don't even see it. We talked about silent mutations. But anyway, so...
Let's tune you up.
Thank you. What we also need is what's a struggle to survive. Now, we sort of alluded to this when we have an overpopulation. When you have, let's say, that field with 3 dogs that had all the limited dog food. Let's say we go several generations and suddenly there's 100 dogs and only enough food for 50 of them. What's going to happen?
Then some of those puppies aren't going to make it.
Right. And they're probably going to compete with each other for the food and the mates, right? And that's a struggle to survive. They need to compete with each other to try to see who's best fit for that environment, okay? And there might be a genetic variant that allows one dog to survive over others.
Like cuteness.
Like, or if it's to get food, maybe who can find food most effectively. But cuteness works in some situations too, like in this one. But anyway, finally, the final step of natural selection is differential reproduction. The organisms that have the best adaptations, they will survive and reproduce. Now, it's important to point out that reproduce part. In nature, we actually see lots of organisms that die immediately after reproducing. And that might seem weird because, wait a minute, that doesn't really allow them to survive their whole life. But really, once you've reproduced, you've made your contribution towards the next generation already.
From an evolutionary perspective.
Yeah, from an evolutionary perspective, yes. It's a little dark, but that's how it works sometimes. There are lots of insects that die immediately after reproducing.
Like predators.
Do predators?
I don't know.
No? Okay. Now you're making things up. And you're referring to the movie Predators, by the way, not to confuse
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, anyway, since those organisms that are best adapted passed it on, the next generation is now able to pass on that gene to the next generation, and so on and so on. So, I got this picture a long time ago. I'm assuming there's an advantage to having long ears in this cat population. And you notice the organisms that had the longest ears, they survived, they reproduced, they created, or they're responsible for all those offspring. Another way of saying that is they had the highest fitness. Fitness is a measurement of an organism's ability to contribute to the next generation in terms of their genes. And this is actually where that term survival of the fittest comes from. Now, fitness here doesn't refer to like me going to the gym and lifting weights. It refers to...
Like the super ripped baby.
Yeah, like the super ripped baby. It refers to your ability to reproduce. So, and that's actually it for our video. Any questions?
No?
No? Works for you?
Yeah.
All right. Dr. Ken will be back at some point, I'm sure.
Thanks, guys.
And have a good day.